The United Democratic Movement, Pan-Africanist Congress and Freedom Front Plus have launched their 2024 election manifestos. The UDM, like other parties, touted partial privatisation of Eskom and merit-based appointments in the public service. Meanwhile, the FF Plus says it will rebuild the economy. The PAC says it aims to build a functional and reliable state. What can we make of these election promises? Well, political analyst Dr. Ebrahim Harvey joins us live to unpack the recently launched manifestos. A very good morning to you, Dr. Harvey. Thank you for your time. With the bigger political parties out of the way, the attention now has turned to their small counterparts, who will also attempt to woo voters ahead of the elections. It was a busy Saturday indeed, with the different political parties pitching their vision for South Africa over the next 5 years. What role do the smaller parties serve?
Hi, good morning. And good morning to the viewers. No, you must remember that all these three parties that you've just mentioned are very small parties, you know. I mean, the PAC, I think, has just one seat. The Freedom Front Plus has, 9. And UDM, you must remember, has gone down from about 14 to 2. So the most dramatic decline at the polls is with the UDM. And if you look at the election manifestos, what is interesting is how they pounce on and pronounce the need urgently, to combat corruption, both the UDM and Freedom Front Plus. It's very significant, though they're small parties, but they speak into what has been probably the most glaring problem in the ANC for at least 10 plus years, corruption and so on. And we've got to see at the polls to what extent this has affected voting sentiment and, choice and how they will vote on the 29th of May. But, what struck me, I'll be honest with you, the PAC is sitting with one MP, but you'd swear that they still stuck in the 1959 when they were formed, It's very interesting, they continue to, and the EFF itself slips into this racialized language, of African people. I mean, they don't use the BC terminology of black, which means it incorporates and includes colored and Indian people who have been historically always a part organically of the oppressed and exploited people. And I'm just saying the PAC, continues with that racialized language, and to be expected, it will, pronounce and emphasize the land question and so on, and that is what it does, But importantly, it pays a lot of attention also to the need to revamp the health system, because of this huge crisis affecting the health sector, and on the eve of wanting to implement, this NHI bill, which I think is going to be a failure for a number of reasons. But back to these smaller parties, you must remember that not much is expected. I think you're going to still have the polls dominated and the outcome dominated by the ANC. Even if it drops to 40 to 45, it will still be the majority party in that coalition. And then the EFF and the DA, one has to see how that is going to turn out. But these small parties that you've mentioned, I don't expect much from. And Bantu Olomisa will be happy. He must be happy if he retains even that 2 seats. They've declined dramatically at the polls from 14, 15, I think, to 2.
Yeah. So
I don't expect much, and Freedom Front Plus, but it's interesting to see how politics is shifting in this country. If you look at their meetings, a significant number of black people in the Freedom Front Plus, and as you know, they drew together all the conservative forces, when they were formed. But, it's interesting to see. They probably just managed to draw some people in the rural areas with promises, renting a crowd. But a significant number of black people I noticed in the audience when they launched the manifesto.
As you speak about the Freedom Front Plus, just reading the Sunday Times here, it talks about how some of the promises that were put forward by party leader Peter Groenewald, he's promised that, proposing to scrap BEE, affirmative action, and all race-based quotas in all labor laws. I mean, that in itself, how will it bode to voters? I mean, you speak about black people having been part of the Freedom Front Plus. What sort of, grounding does this now set for the Freedom Front Plus?
No, I think it's very important to draw a distinction between, which they tried to do recently, and you can see the backlash in so-called colored Indian communities, pushing through this new employment equity and the racialist quotas and a lot of stuff there. Draw a distinction between that, and it's debatable, I did columns on it, but draw a distinction between that and the strong stand that the Freedom Front Plus has taken on BEE and affirmative action. Man, honestly, you just need to go and do some research, and I've devoted there are serious problems. And even the arch proponents of BEE has to sit back and look back and say, we've got serious problems. BEE, to be very frank with you, has been a dismal failure in this country, and it's just created a self-enriching black elite, which has served, interestingly, to deepen the social class inequalities, even within the so-called African population. Social class inequalities has dramatically opened up like you've never seen before. So that is what BEE has done, and it's basically been for black and bourgeoisment, creating a tiny elite, not for the masses at all. They've got nothing. In fact, in inverse proportion to the implementation of BEE, you've had the further impoverishment of black and particularly so-called black African people. So how they treat that, has to be separated from this employment equity legislation that I have serious problems with these racialized quotas and, how they've gone and they're trying to amend it and so on. But to draw that distinction is important. I mean, there can't be any doubt whatsoever. Anybody who's sitting in this country today and wants to clap hands about the accomplishments of BEE must have his or her head red, It's been a dismal failure, really. And I think the sooner it is abandoned, and you need to empower the masses. The masses of people in the townships, with the protest capital of the world, they've not been empowered, they've been disempowered. That's precisely why we're the protest capital of the world, Yeah. So don't lump together BEE and AA. It's another thing, AA, to debate with this thing, about the employment equity bill and the racialist language in there. I think the aims to get rid of BEE because of the reasons I've given, I think it's a noble thing. And the sooner, and including our president, he's a big fan of BEE, probably because he's a product himself of BEE, and how it began and the big role he played in BEE legislation even. Yeah. But we've turned a corner, really. This country has to look way beyond, including the ANC, BEE. You can't build a future with what has completely failed in this country, and that is BEE.
As you touched a little bit on the PAC, we know that it turns 65 years this year. In fact, listening in to what was said yesterday, the party is old enough to admit that it has been its own worst enemy. After launching its policy offering, it's now at 1 percentile party, which is seemingly seeking some sort of refuge and friendship everywhere, including with the former ANC President Jacob Zuma's Umkhonto weSizwe party. Do you think that it could be a coalition match, just looking at the two parties, if they had to really agree on forming some form of coalition?
Well, the MK party are looking for partners and to widen their voter base. And, you can see how determined they are to knock the ANC and to dent their support. And, yes, I think they've been in talks, actually, But I don't, to be very frank with you, in terms of voter sentiment, and you can see the track record of the PAC. I think one time I had 3, 4, and now down to 1. And I don't think the PAC, I think really they've made some serious mistakes which they've conceded, since the elections of 1994. I don't think they would make any huge impact. And it's possible that they will probably throw in their lot, and be wooed by MK, who seems to be looking at, trying to enlarge and increase its voter base and the impact it will have on the polls, But, the PAC, I don't really. I looked at their manifesto. It's just a regurgitation of what they've said before, emphasis on the land question. It's all the old stuff, but very disconcerting and disappointing, I must tell you, which I've said the EFF itself slips into sometimes. When they talk of African people, they don't even mean the black consciousness, black, including colored and Indian people. They're talking in the apartheid African sense, highly ethnic and racialized language. It's rather disappointing, that they still use the same language they used in 1959 when they were formed. I'm talking of the PAC now.
Now, Dr. Harvey, we know that the PAC and AZAPO have now committed to working together for these elections. What sort of impact could that relationship have?
No, well, you're talking about the two main movements. Outside of the ANC and the UDF, Mass Democratic Movement, it was the PAC and AZAPO, and then you see how their electoral fortunes, they never participated, and very poor, where you're now sitting with one PAC. I think it holds potential, and I think they're entering the fray and talking of unity because they see this massive crisis under ANC rule, and they're trying to see how they could, recover lost ground, collaborate. It's ideologically, a lot of basis for collaboration between AZAPO, the BC movement, and PAC, although the big difference is the BC movement has always emphasized black, and they use it deliberately to include Indian and colored people, who I said has always historically been organically a part of the oppressed and exploited people. Whereas the PAC doesn't do that. It still continues with African. Everything they talk about is African, and they're not meaning black, believe me. They're talking about African in the apartheid sense, which is rather disappointing,
And just also trying to get a little bit more detail. I mean, you spoke just now about the UDM. It's made an impressive debut in 1999 during those elections, garnering 3.2% of the votes, and now only holding 2 seats in Parliament with a strong chance of this being adversely impacted by the upcoming polls. How much can the anti-corruption manifesto launch, aspects of matters bode with voters on the ground? I mean, corruption is a big factor, and they've also made some plans around tackling the electricity crisis in the country.
Yes, no, I mean, they speak importantly about the Eskom crisis and what is inevitable, and I can tell you now it's going to hurt poor consumers. This increasing privatization of Eskom, the floodgates are open now. You will not stop it. The independent power producer, which is really the private sector, entering because of the corruption that has happened at Eskom. This is what you're facing now. So Olomisa is speaking to that, and he's acknowledging the increasing and now calling for the increased private sector participation. It seems to make sense because maybe to dent this corruption, and be able to move towards achieving greater equity in terms of electricity supply, you see this massive crisis we're sitting for. But I must tell you, I think it's rather late in the day. Even if they sing the swan song of anti-corruption, which all the opposition parties, because anti-corruption has been such a pervasive and glaring problem, everybody has got it in the election of combat. I don't think that, in fact, as I said earlier, Olomisa must be happy if he still retains the 2 members of parliament that he has, really. I think it's been, you can just see 15 seats down to 2, the most dramatic decline of any party that comes out of the ANC, and splintered away and formed a new party. It's very, and I really think the big problem is him. Bantu Olomisa has not realized that after, I think it's 26 years, surely it's time to go. What is he doing as standing again for no, I'm sure deep down, there are people in the UDM and the legitimate concern, really, that he continues to remain the top leader there. I mean, he should have moved on, really, and created space for other people. Who knows? It might have boosted the chances and revival of the UDM. I think Olomisa is a big part of that problem, and he should really find the resolve to move on and create space for others, you know.
Very well. Thank you so much for weighing in on this discussion, Dr. Ebrahim Harvey, talking to us there about the smaller political parties having launched their election manifestos ahead of the May 29 deadline. I mean, election day, of course, making promises to woo voters in the hopes of making an impact.